Every clone in the Wolffe Pack. General Plo Koon. We all know Plo Koon isn't a clone, but I just had to add him to the list because what's the Wolffe Pack without him? Bro is literally the reason the Wolffe Pack existed in the first place. He was a Keldor from the planet Doran, so he's instantly recognizable by his heavy breathing mask and protective goggles that kept his species alive in oxygen-rich atmospheres. What set him apart wasn't just his skill with the lightsaber or the Force, but because he did things differently. See, some Jedi treated the clones as expendable, but Plo always treated them like his brothers, with lives worth something. He even called them by their names, not numbers, and in return, they gave him loyalty. The clones themselves said it best. Plo Koon doesn't just command us, he fights with us. So it's no coincidence that the Wolffe Pack carried his name with pride. Their entire identity, the wolf emblem on their armor, the brutal effectiveness in battle, all of it came from their bond with him. One of Plo Koon's defining moments came early in the war during the Malevolence Crisis when General Grievous's flagship ambushed his fleet in the Abrogado system, and Plo's cruiser was torn apart, leaving him and a handful of clones, Sinker, Boost, and Commander Wolffe, drifting in escape pods while the Malevolence hunted through the wreckage to finish survivors. Most Jedi would have tried to put on a brave face, but Plo was brutally honest with his men. He didn't hide the danger, yet he also never let them give up. When one clone said, "We're just clones, sir. We're meant to be expendable," Plo Koon's reply was legendary. "Not to me."
We're just clones, sir. We're meant to be expendable.
Not to me.
That one line summed up why the Wolffe Pack would follow him into hell if he asked. But like every story in the Clone Wars, when Order 66 was given, Plo Koon was flying a starfighter over Cato Nymodia. Then the clones he trusted turned on him, opening fire mid-flight, and his fighter erupted in flames, crashing through the towering bridges of the city. And yet, even in death, Plo Koon's influence lingered through Commander Wolffe, scarred but alive, carrying Plo's teachings into the later days of the war and beyond. So let's talk about Commander Wolffe, or CC-3636 as his official designated name. He was bred on Kamino, like every other clone, but somehow ended up at Plo Koon's side, where he rose to become one of the Republic's coldest commanders and more dangerous than most of his brothers. From the beginning, he'd shown a tactical edge that made him invaluable in battle. He commanded the Wolffe Pack with precision and ruthlessness, but also with a deep respect for Plo Koon. This bond is exactly what shaped him. Though Wolffe could be harsh, even blunt, he fought not just for the Republic, but for the general he trusted with his life. The Wolffe Pack's name and armor, with their distinctive grey wolf markings, were chosen under his leadership, reflecting both his ferocity and his loyalty. Now we already know of the Malevolence incident that affected Plo Koon and almost the whole unit. We also know Wolffe survived with scars. Well, later, in another encounter with Asajj Ventress, Wolffe lost his right eye in combat, but rather than retire, he returned to duty with a cold, metallic replacement, the glowing cybernetic eye that became his trademark. All of these was what hardened him even further. Under Plo Koon's command, Wolffe fought in some of the most brutal campaigns of the Clone Wars, from starfighter battles to sieges on the ground. He also worked alongside other commanders like Rex and Cody, earning the respect of the Republic's finest. And then came Order 66. Wolffe obeyed like almost every clone. He turned on the Jedi without question, but deep inside, that obedience ate at him. Unlike many others, Wolffe would live long enough to confront what he had done. Years later, after the rise of the Empire, he removed his inhibitor chip, just as Rex and Gregor had. Then the three of them lived in quiet exile aboard a modified ATTE on the remote world of Selos. By then, Wolffe was older, grayer, and visibly haunted. Unlike Rex, who remained hopeful, Wolffe carried guilt. But even in exile, Wolffe showed the same loyalty that defined him in the war. When rebels like Ezra Bridger and Kanan Jarrus eventually stumbled upon their camp, it was Wolffe who initially panicked and contacted the Empire, fearing retribution. Yet in time, he stood beside Rex and Gregor once again, and when the galaxy called, Wolffe returned to the fight, helping liberate Lothal. Moving on to Sinker. Among the soldiers of the Wolffe Pack, Sinker was the nonchalant and calculative veteran. the kind of trooper who could stay calm even in the most dangerous situations. During the Malevolence Crisis, Sinker was one of the men stranded with General Plo Koon in escape pods, hunted by separatist droid patrols that destroyed survivors, and this was the moment that showed who he really was. It was quite obvious that the odds were against them, so Sinker was the clone who told Plo Koon, "We're just clones, sir. We're meant to be expendable." And to be fair, he was just trying to do what was best, so the general could escape. But Plo Koon refused with the epic line, "Not to me." Eventually, Anakin and Ahsoka rescued them, and Sinker's reputation as one of Wolffe's most trusted soldiers only grew. In the end, Sinker's ultimate life after the Clone Wars is still a mystery. Like most of his brothers, he most likely obeyed Order 66 when it came down. Now, whether he lived long enough to regret it like Wolffe, or perished in the chaos, is unknown. Now let's talk about Sinker's best friend, Boost. Where Sinker was the grounded realist, Boost was his sharp-edged counterpart, always alert, and he earned his name by the way he fought, because he was quick to react, easily adapted to rare situations. Together, he and Sinker formed one of the most reliable duos in the Wolffe Pack, a pairing Plo Koon trusted with his life more than once. Like Sinker, Boost's most memorable moment came during the Malevolence Crisis, so while Sinker voiced the hard truths about being expendable, Boost was scanning for threats and trying to figure out a way to survive. And that balance between the two of them made the Wolffe Pack even more effective. But don't get this wrong, Boost might be this type of tactical fighter, but he wasn't reckless, and for a fact, Sinker was also a great fighter. Boost was just better at it. In the end, just like his best friend, Star Wars canon never gave us the details of his ultimate fate. Number 5. Comet. Alright, so many of the Wolffe Pack's veterans like Sinker and Boost were forged in the early, desperate battles of the Clone Wars, but Comet came into his own later and quickly proved himself as one of the unit's standout fighters. He's recognizable by the striking gray markings on his helmet and armor. Also, for some reason, he carries himself with the confidence of a soldier who had seen it all. Comet served under Commander Wolffe during campaigns on Felucia, one of the darkest and most brutal battlefields of the entire war. On Felucia, the Wolffe Pack fought in dense jungles against endless waves of droids, holding their ground, but Comet was built different, so he was able to adapt to the environment and keep his men alive under near impossible odds. Even after the Trandoshan ambush, where Ahsoka Tano made the decision to cover members of the Wolffe Pack while they scaled the airbase walls, she trusted her instincts and watched the backs of her team so they wouldn't have to worry about blaster fire while climbing, which then led to her capture. And Comet was the one who reported back to Anakin afterward, explaining how Ahsoka's decision protected the team.
She was covering our flank when we scaled the wall.
But also got her captured by the Trandoshans. As a corporal, Comet wasn't just another clone in the ranks, he led men directly in the field, because the Wolffe Pack's missions were rarely simple assaults. They were often last-second rescues, dangerous retrieval ops, and operations where the plan had already gone sideways, and that's exactly where Comet thrived. He also trained extensively with a jetpack, giving him the mobility to adapt on chaotic battlefields, and he was uncompromising when it came to discipline. By the later stages of the Clone Wars, the exact details of Comet after Order 66 was never revealed, so he most likely died. But why don't we talk about a different type of clone, and also a very crucial member of the battalion? Warthog. First of all, Warthog has kind of cynical sense of humor that made him different from the rest. He'd always grumble whenever the Wolffe Pack got stationed on planets where the locals were a little too friendly. Like if he saw smiling natives waiting to greet them, he'd mutter, "Great, it's gonna be another one of those planets." And this sarcastic personality made him memorable. Unlike the frontline clones who carried blasters into the mud, there's a unit that carried the pack into the battle from the skies, and among them, Warthog stood out as one of the Republic's most reliable LAAT gunship pilots. Warthog got his call sign for a reason. His flying style was aggressive, brutal, and his visage was painted with tusk-like patterns that hinted the strength and stubbornness of the beast he was named after. As part of the 104th Battalion, he flew Republic starfighters, transports, and most times flew Wolffe and his squads into some of the most dangerous campaigns of the Clone Wars. So pilots like Warthog had to master more than just the controls of a ship. Imagine the space battles, which were some of the deadliest engagements of the war, with separatist droid fighters swarming in endless numbers and capital ships ripping each other apart with turbo laser fire. For Warthog, one mistake could cost not just his life, but the lives of everyone he carried into the fight. Though his role was less spotlighted in the show, one of his most notable appearances came late in the war during the Battle of Fallujah, where the dense jungle canopy and relentless droid fire made air support nearly impossible. But Warthog still managed to thread his gunship through the chaos, deploying Wolffe squads directly into contested zones and pulling survivors back out under fire. However, like many clone pilots, Warthog's life after Order 66 remains unconfirmed. Finally, the last recognizable clone in the Wolffe Pack, Jag. He was a clone pilot who served under Plo Koon during the Clone Wars, and just like Warthog, his role was to keep the skies clear and the Wolffe Pack mobile. But Jag's story became forever tied to one of the darkest orders ever given in galactic history. At the very end of the war, Jag was flying with Plo Koon over Cato Nymodia. The skies above the bridge cities were heavy with separatist resistance, but for the Jedi Master and his trusted clone pilots, it was just another mission in a war that had stretched on for years. Plo had literally fought alongside his men through countless battles, surviving ion cannons, Grievous's traps, and overwhelming odds, so he trusted them with his life. However, that was when the Order came in. And in that instant, the brotherhood that had defined the Wolffe Pack shattered. While Jag was sitting behind the controls of his starfighter, he received the command encoded in his inhibitor chip to execute the Jedi, and without hesitation, his hands moved to the triggers, and the man who had once flown side by side with Plo Koon turned his cannons on his general. Then he fell through the skyline of Cato Nymodia, where he died. What became of Jag after the war is unknown. Some sources suggest he perished soon after, like many clones caught in the chaos of the Republic's final campaigns. Others believe he may have continued to serve the Empire for a short time before clones were phased out.